We all want the next great thing in Dynasty Fantasy Football. So today I'm bringing you 4 players that I believe are going to merge as Dynasty Fantasy Football stars in 2025. And when we started off with my first player, it's going to be Rashee Rice for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I understand Rashee Rice is coming off an injury and also is potentially going to be suspended early on in the 2025 campaign. But this is Dynasty Fantasy Football, and we are playing the long game, and Rashee Rice is 100% somebody that I want to have on my overall team. If we're looking over on KTC right now, Rashee Rice is sliding in on the board as wide receiver 16, overall player 41, going in the same range behind A.J. Brown, T. Higgins, ahead of Rome Odunze, Devontae Smith. If you're looking at value-adjacent players, behind J.J. McCarthy, ahead of a Hampton, ahead of a Rome Odunze, and I think this is 100% appropriate value for a guy that last season put up 16.2 fantasy points per game in the 4 games that he played, but that doesn't even paint the full story. If you look at that game 4 where he ended up getting hurt, he put up 0 fantasy points. So if you take into account that he really only played 3 games fully healthy, this dude put up 21.6 fantasy points per game. And if you're looking at how that would have done on a points per game basis, the only wide receiver that would have outscored him is Jamar Chase. Now, I know 3 games, it's a super small sample size, so I can't just come out here and saying, okay, cool, Rashee Rice, he's the wide receiver 2 next season. Let's go do it. Trade Justin Jefferson for Rashee Rice. Guys, I'm not that crazy. I understand. But talking about how good Rashee Rice was makes me that much more excited for him in year 3. Even if he does get suspended for the first 4 games, let's be clear, he's still going to be recovering from that knee injury, and it wasn't an ACL, so it wasn't as bad. He's ahead of schedule, but I still think that gives him some extra time early on in the season to get his feet under him and to get back into that overall comfort level coming off of a knee injury. And so I'm excited for Rashee Rice heading into 2025. So if you're trying to go get him, because I know a lot of people are saying too, hey, you got Xavier Worthy. And Xavier Worthy, yes, he definitely came on late in the season, but if you take a look at this in split right here, you're still going to see Rashee Rice played exactly with Xavier Worthy. They're a little bit different of a wide receiver, where Rashee Rice was absolutely looking like the second coming of Michael Thomas, looking like the slant god. I am trying to acquire Rashee Rice in Dynasty Fantasy Football anywhere that I can, because I believe that Rashee Rice is going to go on a trajectory. We already saw elite level fantasy football production this season, but if he can do that across a whole stretch of games, this price tag that he currently has on KTC is going to look like an absolute bargain bin. If he would have done that over a full season, we're putting Rashee Rice in the S tier. We're putting him in the A tier of your Dynasty wide receiver rankings. This dude is a top 6, 7 talent at the Dynasty wide receiver position, and I want a piece of it. So I'm willing to go get it if I can, and if I have him on my team, hold, because this dude is absolutely going to emerge in year 3 as the absolute Dynasty star that we know he can be. The next player that's going to be emerging as a Dynasty Fantasy Football star in 2025, it's going to be Rome Odunze for the Chicago Bears. And Rome Odunze, let us not forget, pick 9 to the Bears last offseason, and everyone was excited to get to pair up Rome Odunze with Caleb Williams. The only downside to this whole situation was you had DJ Moore and you had Keenan Allen in tow. So a lot of people were like, hey, who's going to be the wide receiver 2 after DJ Moore? Is it going to be Rome Odunze? Is it going to be Keenan Allen? But this season, what we saw was Keenan Allen absolutely being the wide receiver 2, where Rome Odunze put up 8.5 fantasy points per game, overall wide receiver 56. But if you take a look at the in splits between Rome Odunze when he played with Keenan Allen versus when Keenan Allen missed, we're all of a sudden going to see Rome Odunze, his overall points per game into 2 games without Keenan Allen, absolutely double. He went from 7.8 fantasy points per game to 14.35 without Keenan Allen. What does that tell me? It tells me all I need to know, that Rome Odunze, if he is the number 2 target in the Chicago Bears offense, is absolutely going to erupt. And so I'm looking at him heading into year 2, not only getting better as a player, not only getting better chemistry with Caleb Williams, who is going into year 2 as well, but we add in an offensive guru in Ben Johnson. Now, I know everyone's excited about the Chicago Bears offense because we're like, oh, it's the Detroit Lions offense, but you got Caleb Williams, you got Rome Odunze, you got DJ Moore. I'm pumping the brakes a little bit when it comes to setting expectations for how good this Bears offense can be. But if Rome Odunze can be the clear wide receiver 2, I think we're talking about Rome Odunze being an absolute value right now with where he's going on KTC and where he could potentially go this year. I mean, we're talking about him as wide receiver 17 on KTC. He's still behind the same guys that we were talking about with Rashee Rice because he's actually one spot behind Rashee Rice. But I think going into year 2, I am taking all the shots that I can on Rome Odunze. I'm trying to trade for him everywhere because I love the upside. And I know a lot of people are going to compare Rome Odunze's situation to a guy like a Jackson Smith and Jigba from last year. And I think that's 100% relevant. I just think they're a little bit of a different player. They win a little bit differently, where Rome Odunze, I primarily like to see him in that X role. I know he can play the slot, but I know Ben Johnson is going to get creative with how he's able to intertwine Rome Odunze into this offense in year 2. So Rome Odunze is my clear number 2 player that I believe is going to be emerging as a Dynasty fantasy football star in 2025. My third player I believe is going to emerge as a Dynasty fantasy football star is going to be Michael Penix Jr. of the Atlanta Falcons. And right now, I feel like Michael Penix Jr. is being super disrespected in the Dynasty fantasy football streets right now. He is QB 16, overall player 46, over on Keep Trade Cut. And yes, did the end of the season, him taking over for Kirk Cousins with about 3 games to go, where he put up 7.4 fantasy points, 12.2 fantasy points, and then versus a pretty bad Carolina defense, put up 26 fantasy points, where he threw for 2 touchdowns, had an interception, but also had a rushing touchdown. You saw the glimpses, you saw the arm talent, you saw the strength, but we didn't necessarily see him absolutely light the world on fire for fantasy football. And so you're going to send me, Caleb, why do you believe a guy like Michael Penix Jr., who is more of a pocket quarterback, doesn't have a ton of rushing upside, what does he present as a fantasy football quarterback? And right now, I hear that argument. My biggest argument is, why is J.J. McCarthy going ahead of Michael Penix Jr. right now in the Dynasty landscape? The reason that I say that is J.J. McCarthy showed zero promise last year, besides the preseason game. Get me? It's a preseason game. But Michael Penix Jr. actually put it out on the field, and I think both of them, similar level prospects. Michael Penix Jr. was drafted ahead of J.J. McCarthy. A lot of people didn't think that needed to be in the streets, but let us not forget that us Dynasty fantasy football managers, we don't know quarterbacks. We don't know quarterback evaluations. We look at the NFL. They spend millions of dollars, and they get these picks wrong all the time. But when looking at Michael Penix Jr., you're putting him in an offense that has Bijan Robinson, that has Drake London, and I think they're going to add some more weapons around those 2 guys. We'll have to see if Kyle Pitts is still there. You know, the hype of every offseason, Kyle Pitts is going there again. I'm not on that train, but we saw Michael Penix Jr. really have a great connection with Drake London. And as somebody that likes to invest in young quarterbacks, we got a lot of time still left with Michael Penix Jr. He's 24 years old, and he's the starting quarterback in the NFL. So as I'm taking my bets, as I'm taking my shots, I think Michael Penix Jr. is in this range where we could easily start to see him slide up the Dynasty fantasy football valley, because guys ahead of him, like a Brock Purdy, like a J.J. McCarthy, I understand that he doesn't necessarily have that rushing upside that a guy like a Jaden Daniels we saw, like a Drake May. Even someone will give Caleb Williams, of course, a little bit more rushing upside due to the way that he's able to manipulate the pocket and use his legs in that rookie class from last year. I just think Michael Penix Jr., we're undervaluing how good he can be in this Atlanta Falcons offense. And so give me some Michael Penix Jr. as a guy that can emerge as a star in 2025. My 4th and final player we're going to be talking about today, it is going to be Jayden Reed for the Green Bay Packers. And when we're looking at Jayden Reed, yes, last season was a little bit of a disappointment in year 24, where we were projecting Jayden Reed to be the alpha, to be the guy that took that next step, because in year 1 had 13.6 fantasy points per game. He was the wide receiver 26 on a points per game basis. So everyone was sending him to the moon, and this guy didn't even fall among the stars. Only put up 11.6 fantasy points in year 2. Wide receiver 38, so kind of took a step back. Not only did he have less targets, he had less receptions and had less touchdowns. Now, why am I saying that Jayden Reed could be the year 3 breakout, could go to the absolute moon, and could be an emerging Dynasty fantasy football star? It's because we've seen the glimpses, we've seen the flashes, and he's in an offense that needs a bona fide alpha level wide receiver. The Green Bay Packers, they were in the market for a guy like a DK Metcalf. They didn't get DK Metcalf. So now we're staring at a team where their best 2 receiving options right now, especially with Christian Watson being out for the beginning of the season with that major injury that he took. We're looking at Jayden Reed as the clear wide receiver 1, and you got Tucker Kraft. I think they need to get Jayden Reed the ball. That is my personal opinion, because when he gets the ball, this dude is an absolute monster. And the thing that I think not a lot of people consider from this last year with Jayden Reed is he was the wide receiver 10 in slot snaps. And we all love our wide receivers that can play in the slot, that can get those opportunities. I want me some Jayden Reed going forward. Now, would I like to see some more targets? Would I like to see some better efficiency metrics? Of course. I think any of us would out of Jayden Reed. But when you're looking at his KTC value right now as wide receiver 37, Jayden Reed behind Mike Evans, ahead of Tyreek Hill. Of course, if you guys need some actual fantasy football production, maybe go try to trade for those if you're absolutely competing for a chip. But if you're just wanting an upside shot on a guy like a Jayden Reed, who was valued as a top 20, as a top 18 dynasty wide receiver, not just a few years ago, I'm going and trying to take a shot on a Jayden Reed emerging as a dynasty fantasy football star, because who else is there in this offense for him to compete with? If he can get to where we think he can be explosive game-wise, I mean, even at the beginning of this year, game 1 versus Philadelphia, put up 33 fantasy points. All of us were excited. We're like, it's here. The breakout's here. He had 2 big down weeks after that and to put up 27 fantasy points, and then it just kind of died out the rest of the season. He had some spike weeks here or there, but we didn't see this Matt LaFleur offense absolutely get Jayden Reed involved, and I 100% think him and Tucker Kraft going forward need to be the main primary targets for Jordan Love, for this offense, and for that Green Bay Packers team to absolutely take the next step. So I believe Jayden Reed, I believe Michael Penix Jr., I believe Rome Odunze and Rashee Rice are all players that are going to be emerging as Dynasty Fantasy Football stars. If you like Dynasty Fantasy Football, hit that like and subscribe button, as we are on the way to 20,000 subscribers on the DLF Fantasy Football YouTube channel. Check out these 2 videos if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.